if you're a debut writer, you should not write 250,000-word books. Science fiction has done religion a disservice by pretending it will just go away. Now, I think almost everybody should outline, frankly. I think even writers who don't would be better if they did. The only real way you can evaluate the quality of a work of literature is to understand the distance between what the author set out to achieve and whether or not he or she achieved it. Everybody's like, I can't buy the book. It's not possible. Because usually when a book gets publicity is on publication. It's not 5 years later because Mike's Book Reviews decides to read the book. And
Welcome everyone to the Toot Around podcast. My name is Richard.
My name is Austin.
Today we got a somewhat special guest in a change in pattern for us on this podcast. We've had guests over in interviews where, we not the biggest fan of their book and then we interview. And now we have someone who's not the biggest fan of his first book, but we were actually fans of this guy's books and we're having him on for an interview. So welcome Christopher Ruocchio onto the channel.
Christopher.
Well, thanks for having me. For what it's worth, I'm not the biggest fan of my first book either. I've written a few I like better since. So,
it's wild that you and Austin are more closely aligned on your own book series.
Oh, that is true. Yes, that is true.
I find that strange.
I feel vindicated.
You like the books. Yeah.
He feels the same as I do about his own books. I mean, you agree. Of your first three, Howling Dark's the best, right?
Yeah, it's my favorite. It's my favorite child that's not my actual children, yeah.
Oh, which is your favorite of your own books?
Howling Dark. Because I evaluate them based on how much fun they were to write, and that was just the best writing experience. It was the one where I sort of figured out my method. I started outlining on that book. I didn't outline book one at all. I just sort of tinkered with it for 3 years in college. And I did it quickly. I did it efficiently. Everything worked. I was also very present. It was just every decision was very conscious. It was very deliberate. I was very in control. And then the later books, something was happening, right? I was getting married for book 3. And then book 4 was 2020, and they split it on me. They turned it into books 4 and 5. And book 5 had this weird Frankenstein, I had to create a first act problem for. And then book 6, my publisher divorced me.
Good thing it wasn't your wife. Okay, publisher's fine.
Yeah. Much better.
Yes.
Publisher's much more replaceable than wives. But we since remarried, the publisher and me, so everything's cool. And book 7 is just relentless. It's the longest one, so it's just been more of a struggle. But book 2, just everything worked all the time. I just had the best time on book 2. So that's why it's my favorite.
At the time of this podcast release, we're recording this February 7th for those who want to know, but the announcement by the time this podcast is up for your book, people will know what the date. So do you want to reveal the day and we can have a little cover pop up of the book as well?
Yeah. So book 7, Shadows Upon Time, is coming out on November 18th of this year. It'll be out in hardcover and ebook on launch. The paperback, as is tradition, follows about a year later. Very normal for publishing. Audio should be the same day. We've had some hiccups with that in the past. We'll see what happens. It's a mystery. As of time of recording, I have actually not finished writing it. I have about 5 chapters to go. It has been very hard getting this book done. And I have a daughter who is coming out between the recording of this podcast and its airing. My daughter will be born. And so things are a little bit hectic around here. But the book will get done. It is very close to getting done. By the time she arrives, assuming she gets here, which she's supposed to, I should have 2 chapters left. So even with the new baby, I will knock those out so the book is done and then start my paternity leave, which is not optimal, but that is the situation. So November 18th. And it is available now for pre-order, basically wherever books are sold, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, etc. If you want to get it signed, you can get a pre-order signed copy from quailridgebooks.com. I will sign them on release week, and they will ship them out, so you will not have them on the day, but it doesn't matter where you are. We will ship them. They will ship them anywhere in the world. You just have to be willing to put up with shipping rates. So
And we'll put
Quill
all
Ridge
that in the
books.
description below. So you mind sending us those links afterwards? We can just toss them in
Totally.
there.
Yeah.
We'll put those
Yeah.
all in the description. And I guess first, early congrats from both of us. We
Yeah.
said this off camera, but just want to make sure it's on camera so people know we're good people. Like,
Yeah,
hey,
we got to get our social brownie
Hey,
points
Christopher,
in.
congrats. But
Yeah, thank you.
seriously, big congrats. I guess starting it on this, being a parent and having your first, this is your second kid, right? So having your first and second kid while you're writing a big series like that, how has parenthood affected your writing? I mean, time management, but also just how you write.
Time management's been really the big thing, right? Just sort of that's a very big life adjustment to get used to. I don't know if it's a bigger one than getting married was, to be honest, right? But it is, because I found mostly that the older people in my life have exaggerated how arduous having a child is. I think our culture is sort of very against that, and I've been shocked at really just how wonderful the whole experience is.
I love that.
Fecal matter notwithstanding. But
I don't love that.
but I like really, really love being a dad. It's been great. I've got, by the time this is out, I will have 2 little girls, and they're the best. I'm assuming number 2 is also the best, but the first one's amazing. It's been just the coolest, which is about 20 months old now, 20 months of my life. But figuring out how to work around that was hard. The first year, my wife was still working, and she went into the office. So I would work very sporadically, very intermittently. This is partly why book 7 has been so difficult. It's just sort of managing that. Now, in the last month, I finally realized that what I need to do, because her sleep schedule is sort of stabilized, is I just need to get up at 4 a.m. and work, because it's always been the case for me that my best writing time is in the morning. The best thing I can do is get up and sort of putter around for an hour and then start working. Because as soon as I stop. Especially if I stop and then go eat something and it takes me like an hour and a half to get back, I'm just done. Something changes about my brain chemistry. I don't know what it is. I can't get back to writing after that unless I really, really try. And to do that, it takes a lot of time, and it takes productivity apps and disabling the internet completely and all sorts of things. So I need to write in the morning, and really sort of structuring my day around that and moving all of the work that's not writing into little windows of time in the afternoon. That was sort of all hard learned lessons. But then in terms of, sort of the content and stuff, people think I wrote book 6 after I had my daughter, for reasons perhaps not worth getting into. But I didn't actually. So I don't really know how it's affected me down to sort of the artistic level, because I do think I'm pretty good about separating the character from myself, right? But certainly there's this whole new dimension of life that I was ignorant of, that I'm not so much ignorant of anymore. Of course, there's, I'm the parent of barely a 2-year-old, right? So there's a lot about being the parent of, say, a 15-year-old that I just don't know. So we'll figure that out when we get there. But, that's also a lot less scary than it used to be. So
how has coming on podcasts like ours and Mike affected your writing? We're watching you now. You get so many. I mean, as your books become more popular, the anxiety of book 7, how stressful is this? Are you stressed?
Coming on interviews is never particularly stressful.
Yeah.
The only problem is, occasionally you run afoul of the comment section for whatever reason. I famously do not like the Denis Villeneuve Dune movies, and I made the mistake of saying that too emphatically with Mike. Every now and then you just run into people who don't like one thing or another you say, and of course the solution to that is either to not read the comments or not to care.
Yeah.
But I am not super, when I'm writing, I don't really, it sounds callous, but I don't think about my readers at all when I'm writing. It just doesn't matter. Writing has always felt like a very private, sort of solitary thing. I'm always surprised when people say words like Cielson to me. It's like, who told you? I remember the first time I heard my dad say the word Cielson out loud, I was it was very disorienting. It was like someone had read my diary, which in a sense they had, right? And so it's very easy for me to sort of have that wall there. When I'm in this room, I'm working, I'm usually completely alone. And, my wife is very reluctant to make the trek up the stairs right now. And so this is about as isolated as I can be, right? And so on the day, in the moment, right, it's very easy for me to not think about that stuff. But then the rest of the time, sure, right, I I worry a lot about book 7 not meeting people's expectations, but how I get to your expectations is like a me problem, right? And so you want to surprise people, but you also don't want to like completely pull the rug out from under them, because that's not fun. Like, why did you trip me, Christopher? So you have like this weird dance where you want to surprise readers, but enough that it's within the boundaries of tolerance, right? But that's also not a calculated thing, again, because I just don't really think about what the reception is going to be when I'm working. I just sort of have anxiety about it every other moment of my life. Because like the decisions have been made a long time ago, and this being the last book in the series, really changing something in the final act would show, right? And so a lot of the stage has been set, the fate is sealed, etc. And it's just a question of sort of praying that the decisions I made 10 years ago are the right decisions. And that's not to say that like things haven't shifted or sort of blurred a little bit, or that there isn't room for any innovation, but like a lot of the cake is baked, right? And so I'm committed, I guess. So we'll see what people think. But I'm also, and I said this before we started recording, like I have no clue like what people's reception will be like. I thought Demon in White was my worst book when I finished it and turned it in, and reliably that's a crowd favorite. So I just don't know what people are going to think, and maybe that's okay.
It's your favorite, Rich?
So far,
of the 3 we've read so far, yeah.
Of the 3 I've read so far, it's my favorite. I'm excited to actually go into book 4.
Real excited, yeah.
One of the nice things that I don't normally get to have in a lot of series, when you run into fandoms, often there's like a crowd favorite of like, oh yeah, this consistently book 4, book 3. But the whole community has kind of a collective favorite with some outliers. Mm-hmm. The unique thing I found with your series in particular is people's favorites are kind of across the board. I've not really seen a consensus other than book 1 is not anyone's favorite, but then after that, 2 through 6 so far is up in the air. So it gets me a little excited to continue on reading, because I know it's not like a precipitous drop off as far as I know.
We're glad you didn't peak in book 1.
Yeah,
exactly. Me too. My big fear all these years has been that I peaked in book 3, but 4 has increasingly had a little bit of a coterie, and 6 I think came out of the gate swinging pretty hard. So hopefully 7 will be right up there. I really want 7 to be everyone's favorite, right? Like you want to end in the right place, right? But that just won't be the case, right? Like people will think whatever they want to think, and they'll feel whatever they need to feel, and I cannot control that. The things I can control are the books, and and that's enough. It has to be enough, right? So
one of our patrons has a great question on this, actually. So this Owen Meany, thanks Owen for being a patron. He wanted to ask you this question. He said, you have said you are a big believer in outlines, as you're discussing now, as part of the creative process. The ending of the upcoming Shadows Upon Time was set up from book 1 of the series. As you finish wrapping up book 7, how much of how Hadrian gets to the end remains in your original outlines? If you want to give a percentage, or just however you want to answer that.
Yeah, it's pretty much so really the ending act of this last book was the original idea in a lot of ways, right? And so for that to change very much, right, it would sort of have broken the whole premise, right? It would have undone all the work, right, in a certain sense. But everything's been elaborated on a little bit more. So it's not that it's changed; it's that stuff has grown up around it. The basic blueprint is always there, but there are cabinets in the house that I didn't know were going to be there. The wallpaper is not the same as what I thought I'd end up with. But as I went along, I'm like, ooh, this looks nice, right? Like put that in the house, right? Maybe a plant can go here. Maybe I'll add an extra page of that battle scene for Austin.
I think that was off camera too.
Yeah, I think it was. I'll drag it out a little bit longer.
I said he should have taken a page out of his one of his battle sequences. We're not spoiling any books here, so anybody watching, don't worry, we won't spoil.
Yeah, nope. Should have probably done that at the beginning of the
Earlier,
video.
yeah.
But yeah, spoiler free for the entire interview.
Sorry for interrupting. I just want to make clear to the audience we're not
it's fine.
trying
I was just messing around. But no, like I'd say it's basically on plan. There's some surprise furniture, but as much as I talk about outlining, right, and this belief in rigorous planning, I've been watching Twin Peaks as I'm signing all these broken binding editions, right? And David Lynch talks a lot about how when he's working, he like eats the same thing every day, and I basically have seen him wearing the same thing in every interview, which I can relate to. Nothing to do with David Lynch, my choice to wear a uniform, but the thing about doing that is that's like one less thing to worry about. And if you do the outline and you take a lot of your worrying and your planning off the table because you've done that, then you have a lot more free neurons to sort of find things along the way. And often those surprises, because they come from these sort of deeper structures of your brain, can be some of your better ideas. And you might not get to them if you don't plan. And so the outline is actually not just like a way of sort of paving over writer's block, but it also is a way of paving roads to spontaneity. And so there are things that show up that are spur of the moment, but there are things that don't break the mold, right, that you've already established. So you can have it both ways, I guess. So there are some surprises still, even for me, as I was going along, but they aren't things that sort of disrupted the whole system.
It's kind of the concept of creative limitations, that often the artists have the most creativity is when they're put into some type of box. Either there's cool exercises artists will do of like only picking up the pen 5 times, and you see the work that they can do with that. Or honestly, just any medium you work with, your chart, chiseling marble. Well, you have a limitation to how you can actually sculpt that. So I imagine something similar with a novel. Yeah. You can go down the route of complete freedom. No boundaries, no outline, no anything. Anything could potentially happen. But then that's maybe just too much freedom for any type of, all your energy is going to just making it make sense rather than being the spontaneity or creativity of it. Am I kind of in the wheelhouse?
Where a lot of people go wrong when they start trying to write is they just have a blank page and they're just like, I'm going to write a book, and they just freeze. And that's like too big an egg to swallow. Like you're not a snake. You can't unhinge your jaw. You need to get a knife and fork, and break it into little pieces. So,
how'd you start off with your first book? Then, like just a complete outline of the entire series. Did you start with like a sample of like, this is a cool scene, I'm going to write this? How'd you start off with book one?
Yeah, by doing a bunch of things wrong, for me at least, as it turns out. Now, I think almost everybody should outline, frankly. I think even writers who don't would be better if they did. But it's maybe a bold, aggressive claim. But I found the experience so transformative for me that I think maybe this is something like a rule. But sort of wary of rules with creative processes just because human beings can be so different. Nevertheless, this was like such a big deal for me because the first book I just sort of noodled at, depending on how you count it, I noodled at since I was like 8 years old, right? Like I knew I wanted to write when I was a kid. I thought you had to be super old to do it. So it was like not that serious until it was like 10 or 11 when Aragon came out. And I was like, oh, he's not old. I can do this then. It's allowed. And then I started to work at it more seriously. But it took me a long time to sort of figure out, how to do things and how to get better at them, dialogue,
oh my God,
scene dressing, whatever. Right.
I have to ask you this, Christopher, because when Emperor Silence, you were how old when you wrote that?
Depending on the part of the book you're looking at, between 17 and 23.
How do you sound so old in the book? Respectfully, how do you sound so aged? It does not seem like a 20-year-old writing that.
Well, if you ask my mother, I've always been old.
Okay.
So that helps. If you can be born at 85, I've actually gotten younger as I've lived.
Naturally, yes.
I think my mother would agree with me, Mom, if you're watching. But really, like, I read mostly older books, especially now. I've really unless someone asks me to do a blurb, like I've stopped keeping up with new sci-fi and fantasy in particular. I read, I'll read something if I'm, it's professionally useful for me to read it, but I just don't have as much time, and like I spend so much time working that when I am not working, I would like rather do anything else. But books I've already read have sort of made the cut, so I do a lot of rereading, which I always did because I was never a library kid, and my parents they bought me books, but they didn't buy me every single book I wanted all the time, right? Because that would be unreasonable. So I did a lot of rereading, and I still do. But but as a consequence, I read, the stuff I read as a kid, which was, older, more established anyway, right? Because as a kid, if you're only buying a book every month or every couple months or something, then you probably are buying stuff that's like more high profile just because, you're buying stuff that you hear about, right? And I also had a high school science fiction class, and it was taught by an older gentleman, Mr. Goheen. And so like most of the sci-fi I've read is like 2 or 3 generations like out of phase with me, right? So I find I have a lot in common with like 60, 70-year-old fans when I'm at conventions in terms of like the writers that I've read. And my favorite writer is Tolkien, which is like a super cliched fantasy writer, choice, right? But his style was very Victorian in the 50s, right? Like he was sort of panned by the literati of the time for not being a modernist, right? Meaning stylistically a modernist, but also philosophically as well, right? Tolkien is romantic is perhaps not quite the right word because that brings some connotations that don't apply to him, but stylistically, yes, right? Because he grew up reading Haggard, right, who was a Victorian writer, and obviously reading stuff older than that. And Tolkien in particular left such a stylistic imprint on me because it was the only audiobook I owned for a really long time. I had the CDs, and I like wore them out, right? I had like the 108 CD box set or something. And I just listened to them on loop. There were like years as a child where I didn't listen to music. I just listened to that audiobook over and over and over and over and over again. And so it was maybe a little bit manic, actually, but
maybe a smidge.
But like I would fall to sleep listening to the Robert English recording of Lord of the Rings, and so I just like that was just like in my head all the time. It was to the point where I listened to the Andy Serkis recording, and it kept tripping me up because he inflected the sentences differently, and I was like, "This is not the same book. What are you doing?" I love Andy Serkis, but like who doesn't? But I was so used to that Rob English recording, so I was just. I've got Tolkien like in my cells, because like my brothers both have distinctly more Southern accents than I do, and I think that the audiobooks also tilted that a little bit.
You're not kidding. This is manic. This is a problem. You need
I
audiobook
the very
kicked the Southern accent out of you.
That's oh my god.
Not like substantially, right? Like my dad's from New York, so like we have sort of a weird hybrid accent anyway. But like my brothers don't sound like Shelby Foote or something.
Got it.
Although that would be awesome. I wish I sounded like Shelby Foote. But
your audiobook narrator is fantastic, by the way.
He's so good.
It's so good. Yeah.
Yeah, I learned recently he was in the Solomon Kane movie, which is awesome. Which I don't know if you've ever seen, but it's like pretty good. It's great.
I know you have great taste because you shouted David Lynch out already. I mean, rest in peace, David Lynch just passed away this year, right? And
that's what prompted me to watch Twin Peaks. I needed to watch something because signing 16,000 title pages is you can't do anything else. So.
Oh, so you're not going to do a podcast like Sanderson does of signing stuff when you could have done that, brought out your sheet of paper,
double efficient.
It's been very hard for me to find 2 hours to do that in, and like by the time I do, I'm like, man, I could just watch another episode of Twin Peaks. I don't know,
or just be a weekly guest on Tutor Ramble,
Well, but yeah. So no, I have done some. I've done some streaming, but it's just also been. My brain is like falling on my ears at this point too. So, anyway, I'm totally rambling, so I will just stop. But yeah, so it was the audiobooks really.
Yeah, I will say it. I wanted to ask how you felt about and I guess it's not just recent, but over the past at least year, how it feels to be where your books are selling out, where actually it's hard to get certain editions of it. I'm saying this in the sense of just today, I was going, man, I have the first 3. I need to at least buy the physical copy of book 4. and I'll just buy the rest of them. And I couldn't buy it on Amazon. The hardcovers were out of stock. Went to Barnes & Noble. Most of them were out of stock on Barnes & Noble. I went to Books A Million. They apparently had some of them. And then Barnes & Noble had Disquiet Gods hardcover in stock, but didn't have the rest. And so I had to kind of go on a hunt.
Christopher, let him pay you. What are you doing?
I know.
Yeah, it's all personal and it's all me. Yes.
But how's that
years,
felt?
This was like the like, where is book 3, Patrick? For me, like, this was the question that like just drove me into werewolf form.
Okay.
And I just like, I had to like, I was a waiter for like 7 years, so like you get used to answering the same question all the time. So I sort of had to deal with it, but it was so frustrating because like I could not do anything about it. What happened basically, right, is book 1 came out in hardcover, but if you're a debut writer, you should not write 250,000 word books because bookstores will allocate shelf space by the inch. And so if you write a shorter book, they will order more copies of your book, which means your publisher will print more copies of your book, which means that you can reach more readers and you don't struggle to find an audience for 6 years. So don't write a giant book. It turns out, actually. So they only printed like 4,000. And so there were only 4,000 copies of book 1 in hardcover, period, until last year. At least U.S. edition. And typically what happens, right, with most authors' books is they'll print them in hardcover and they'll move to paperback and that's it, right? For a book to stay around in hardcover requires it to be selling at a high enough velocity to justify the print runs, because they print them in thousands, right? And the more thousands they can print at once, the cheaper the book is, which means your margin as a publisher is better item for item, right? So if you can print 5,000, that's way better than printing 2,000. And usually subsequent print runs get smaller, right? Just because people have bought the book. We like tend to not think about this because the authors everybody talks about are big enough that their hardcovers are just around. And so I was in this weird thing where, because the like publicity wave really hit so late relative to the release cycle of those earlier books, everybody's like, I can't buy the book. It's not possible. Because usually when a book gets publicity is on publication. It's not 5 years later because Mike's Book Reviews decides to read the book, and YouTube is a relatively new phenomenon.
Did he ever tell you how he found the book?
One of the people on his Discord server recommended it to him.
That's all.
It was
just like that.
Yeah, thanks, Giovanni.
Nice.
But yeah, I know who it is. So I owe that guy a lot. But yeah, no. So like all that stuff, like publishers didn't have really a means to sort of adjust for this. DAW had never reprinted a canceled hardcover in 50 years, and they did finally. So they did the first 3 books again last year. They're doing 4 and 5, I think, in March. So they'll be out soon, and those are just reprints. So there's very little pomp and circumstance. They're just out. I don't know exactly what day it'll be, and I believe the plan is for 6 to come out before 7 comes out in November. So it'll all be fixed soon, but this is like very, like for DAW at least, it was unprecedented. It is very unusual for a book series to sort of get this not a second chance, because I was doing okay before.
You caught your
I wasn't
second
doing
wind.
like, what's that?
You caught your second wind.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and it almost never happens. Usually it's just, it is what it is. And where it was okay. The first 3 books had earned out by the time 4 came out. But it wasn't where my wife could quit her job, right? Which she did last year. So,
is that when you felt like you made it in that terms of when your wife was able to quit her job?
Yeah, because when I quit to work full-time was actually like my lowest sales ever. I just, we were like, well, my wife had a good job at the time. And we're like, well, it would be better if I could push harder and get stuff done, because I was working for Bain Books as an editor during the day, and that was great. But it was 8 hours a day, right? And if I took that time back, I could do more stuff for me. And if you can work for yourself, that's always better than almost always better than working for someone else. So I took that time and was able to get books 4 and 5 out and do a bunch of other things and sort of capitalize on on the opportunity, which was a blessing. But I've been able to return the favor, and now our children have both parents at home all the time, which is a blessing. So,
wow, that's a great circumstance.
Yeah, that is
yeah.
incredible.
Oh gosh.
I guess having those side projects you did at the time, was one of those the Thor comic, or was that earlier?
That would have been around then.
Yeah.
I met Steve McNiven in 2019, but I think we wrote it in 2021. It took a while for that to happen. And it was supposed to be, Marvel was going to do a new series of like an anthology series that was new writers, veteran artists, and vice versa. But I think Steve and I were the only people who ever turned in our work. And so they were like, what do we do with this? We paid them for it. So it ended up shoved in the back of Avengers 750, which was very cool. But it's cool. I like never, did you read it?
No.
Yeah.
Another shout out to Scott, our buddy Scott, patron, our lawyer friend. But he was saying this is weird. Like why'd he this is just a real, not random factoid you find on IMDb under the director cut. Like this is just a random fact about the person. I'm like, oh wow, you wrote a Thor thing? Like what? I was just so curious.
Yeah, it's 11 pages. And Steve McNiven, a guy who drew Old Man Logan, Civil War, really lovely guy, brilliant artist. He was reading Empire Silent at Raleigh GalaxyCon in 2019, and he wrote me an email that morning and said, I saw you live in Raleigh. Are you here? And I was like literally an aisle over, so I walked over, and like he like loves my books, which was like very. I was gobsmacked, right? Like he's legendary artist, right? So we talked, and he said, "You ever thought about comics?" And I said, "Like, no, not really. Like, cracking books was hard enough. Like, two things." So he said we should like totally do a thing, and we wrote a Thor comic, and like nothing ever came beyond that. I never really heard from the Marvel editorial office again. But it was super fun to like learn how to do it, and it was an honor and a privilege to work with Steve. Right? I'm very proud of that story. I think I've never spoken to someone face to face who's read it ever.
I'm sorry, I wasn't the first. Damn it!
No,
I should have done my research.
No, it's okay. Very proud of that story. I just never, never get to talk about it. So,
well, I mean, like you were talking about, we kind of pigeonholed ourselves into like our niches books, so don't really read comic books very often. So, but
yeah, I generally don't either. My superhero stuff is usually limited to the screen. I've of course read some arcs over the years, but yeah, it never really occurred to me. But I knew who Steve was. Hard to escape, learning some of these things, right? But I'd never really, the thought of doing it had never crossed my mind, and I wasn't sure exactly, like what I would do. So like, I sent them. They asked me to pitch, Avenger stories, and I was like, "Well, Conan has been an Avenger before. Can I do a Conan story?" And they were like, "You must pick a normal Avenger." And I was like, "You jerks!" So I did Thor, which was super fun.
Nice.
Yeah,
I guess from I think Kendall had this question. Did you want to ask her a question about what he's going to do afterward?
Yeah. Oh yeah, that is. So Kendall from our Patreon and Discord one asked the question of, do you know what you're going to write after the Sun Eater? And follow up, is it going to be fantasy?
Yes and yes.
I can't wait.
Well, there we go.
I can't wait.
Yeah. I turned in the proposal last week.
Oh wow.
And it's not like we're not 100% like we're going to do this thing, but my editor said this thing is great, and I said thank you. I know. I'm very excited about it. So I think it'll probably be that thing, and then we'll see where it goes. I probably shouldn't say anymore, but
okay.
Hey, that's breaking news here. That's great.
Yeah, there we
go. I guess from the from other pop culture news stuff, did you see Christopher Nolan's doing the Iliad?
Yeah, I did.
I guess I'm asking you specifically because I know you minored in classics, or you're and theater might not have been so, but classics and English.
Yeah,
literature.
no theater, but
some. Are you excited about that? What do you think?
I was very surprised. Like, it felt like a very not on brand choice, right? Like, he's like, I mean, Oppenheimer is a historical, right? But it's still modern. For him to do a ancient period piece like that in a piece of classical literature as well is very surprising to me. That's not surprising me that he would like Homer or something like that, right? But just that he would go to Homer for his options was surprising. Some of the cast choices I'm not excited about. I don't know who's playing who, but I'm not sure about Spider-Man.
Tom Holland's in there. Yeah.
Yeah,
It-
I saw somebody saying like, "Oh no, is he Odysseus?" And that would be a very poor choice. I think. I think if he's Telemachus, I think that would be fine. If Matt Damon's Odysseus, that would be okay. But like, look, Chris Nolan's obviously he's a genius, right? He is. There are so few directors, and as much as I like don't like Villeneuve's Dune, right? Like he's one too, right? That have any sort of style or substance to them, right? I'm certainly willing to give it a try. Like I can't remember the last thing he made I didn't like. I haven't seen Tenet. I know Tenet's very polarizing.
Rich, I saw the objection.
Yeah, I was just like, Tenet? No,
Yeah.
okay.
Okay.
I haven't seen it yet, but it sounds cool. But like I don't know. I was not in a place to watch it when it came out. So
considering some of the themes of your book, wouldn't not spoiling for people that are listening in, but wouldn't that be right up your alley with some of the?
that's why I like. It sounds really great,
Yeah.
actually.
Yep.
But some of his my one critique of Nolan is that his ability to communicate theme is he's either like way too on the nose or it's like I'm not really sure what he is about, right? Like Interstellar is very on the nose and it's not subtle or smoothly executed, right? And I'm not saying I'm perfect either, right? But like and then some movies like I just don't quite know like I don't want to say what the point is, right? But like sometimes I'm confused. Like Inception. I know what Inception is doing, but like I don't understand why any of that was necessary to get a guy to sign over his business. Like the basic question of why with Inception is one I don't have an answer to. It all makes sense. When that movie came out, everybody's like, "This movie is so deep and complicated." And like, it's fine. Like, it's not hard. This is not the trickiest dream movie that's ever been made.
What is the best dream movie?
I don't know, but like I remember seeing somebody say like all of his dreams are like engineering drafts, right? They're all like blueprints. Like he doesn't dream in sort of it's not like Paprika or something, right? The anime film where it's just like trippy colors and things being weird and it's not Lynchian, right? Like Nolan's dreams he dreams of blueprints and I think Tolkien would say he has a mind of metal and wheels.
Rich, you gotta agree with me on this. Like the fact that Christopher actually goes after, like, he'll say his opinion on movies and books he doesn't like. Like so many authors will go like, this is just, they won't talk about anything they don't like or critique. And like, oh, you're known for critiquing Dune. You're coming after. I love Interstellar. I know you also like Interstellar, but you're coming after. I love
Interstellar. I think it's great. But like, we, especially like in media, right? Like everybody is so afraid of hurting other people's feelings or saying something, right? Like, look, like, like my feelings get hurt all the time, actually, right? Like I see people say,
I'm sorry, you saw our book one review. I'm so sorry.
Yeah, right here, right? People, but that's fine, right? Like, and if you can't handle it, like I'm sure Christopher Nolan can handle it. I'm not saying he's terrible, right? I really, really respect him. I love the first two Batman movies in particular. The first one especially. Like I know everybody loves The Dark Knight, but like the first one has more of an atmosphere. But like he's obviously a genius, right? He's incredibly talented. So like absolutely, like I will be there to see his Odyssey, right? I did not go see Gladiator 2, but
yeah,
I have not seen it either. You haven't, Rich? Yeah.
Seeing the trailer, it looked like a very unnecessary movie. And
sure.
Why should I go and ruin my perfect image of Gladiator 1 and just let that one disappear? Gladiator 2 doesn't exist. Just like Blues Brothers 2. It doesn't exist. I have perfect image. There's only one movie.
I'm super curious. What are your favorite movies, Christopher? If you had to pick your staples.
Yeah, well, like, My favorite movie ever, right? If I want to give like a snobby like art house answer, and maybe it isn't even that art house, right?
This is
Is
the right
Lawrence of
place.
Arabia, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like Lawrence of Arabia is great. We don't make those sort of big cast of thousands historical movies anymore. David Lean is a genius, right? You know, all those graphic match transitions, just all the location shooting, right? Like that movie is such an outsized impact on cinema, right? That like Dune filmed in the same locations, right? Like because of course you have to film there, right? So did Episode 9 of Star Wars, right? Like they filmed in Wadi Rum, and like I think in the last couple of years, like all these big sci-fi movies, like we have to go to the same place because of that movie, right? But also like T. Lawrence is just a character, from history. Like he's a fascinating singular person, right? I tend to. It's very popular in history these days to like not look at people anymore. It's like we have to look at the mute processes, the dumb mechanisms of nature and economics and all this stuff, because history can't possibly be, a collection of biographies, right? Human beings don't matter, right? There are no great men, there are no great women, fie on all that. And like that's clearly wrong, actually, right?
Where's my quote book?
Like
There's this one line you put in Demon in White. It's not even a spoiler. It's your line. I mean, I could say,
yeah,
right?
sure.
Oh, that was so.
Oh, I love that. Let me just pull it up. I'm so sorry. I should have pulled it up before
No,
I
it's
interrupted
okay.
you. Keep going.
No, it's okay.
Well, no, I understand. Like, do we really need another movie of critiquing capitalism? Movie number 5,751 of like, I get it. People are greedy. Of like just these concept movies can be fun in bits, but yeah, I'd love
The thing
more.
about that is like
biographical
ideas
movies.
are almost never deep, actually, right? If you like lay down what something is about, right? The themes are almost always shallow, right? Greed is bad, right? Love is good. Love will conquer all, right? Mercy is great, right? Vengeance is destructive, right? These are all for babies, actually. Like my daughter could repeat any one of those. She's very fluent for a 20-month-old. Don't know if she'd understand any of them, but like it is like none of that is hard, right? A person is interesting, right? Because a person can relate to those themes, right? A character is interesting. And people always say like, "Oh, I'm a character." Like I like stories that are about character. All stories are about character. If they're, it's a question of how well. And if the answer is not well, it's a bad story. Like stories are for people, by people, about people. And if they're about ideas, if they're about ideas, then they don't stick with you because you can understand that vengeance is bad in a sentence, right? But living with Edmond Dantes is a different thing.
Then a question, little pushback on it. Being a sci-fi writer,
Yeah.
at least in my experience, there are quite a few examples of sci-fi books that at least were very impactful for me, where clearly the character was not the focus, and the character is almost an afterthought, where it is about the idea, the world, the concept, and kind of metaphysical rather than a character. Can that still be impactful?
Sometimes that can work, right? But I do think those stories, I think like Foundation, for example, might be better if we like actually lived those events more strongly through the characters who experience the sort of turning of history. I think it's one thing to know that Rome is burned and a bunch of people say it's going to get burned, and it's another thing to be there and smell it. And that's not to say that like, you shouldn't have ideas, right? Or that your story shouldn't be about those ideas too. But I'm not a Platonist. I don't think ideas exist in a vacuum. I think that like, I think ideas need to be embodied in people, right? And if they're not real, right? There's a line in Book of the New Sun where Gene Wolfe talks about things that are weaker than our words for them, and he's talking about concepts like the state, right? If people just don't believe in something like democracy, right, or monarchy for that matter, right, they cease to exist, right? You need people to will these things into being, and ideas like mercy, like justice, right, are very mutable unless people embody them, right? And like the more you embody those principles, right, then the more real those principles are, right? That's why like Batman's the realest superhero because he is justice actually, right? Like he is, and Also, Batman's just better. But
Dare I say the word? They are paragons of that value. In a way.
Right, exactly, right, and like because like this is like a basic Aristotelian like Platonist division, right? Like Aristotle's a hylomorphist, right? Like he thinks these ideas need to be in things, right? In the same way that like your soul does not exist without your body, and vice versa, right? You're not the same person if one of those things is disfigured in some way, which is like something I write about a lot, actually.
Yeah,
in the setting.
I love your writing on that. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks. And but this applies to like everything, right? And I think if a story, right, that's about an idea is able to put those ideas on the ground and smash them into the other ideas in the story, like those are the best stories, right? It's fine if you do the bird's eye view thing. Like maybe you don't have time to like really be in every idea all the way, right? As a writer, I certainly don't, right? But if you can do it, that's ideal, I think.
It reminds me of something I don't know where I picked it up, but it was someone's talking to me about a value versus a conviction, and values are your beliefs, your values. You don't really know what you value until you're tested, and that would be like at least the definition that I hold. It's not really an actual definition, but a conviction is a value that's been tested. And so an idea in a book is cheap, but if you have a character that tests the idea, that's actually something interesting. And that could be a conviction if you risk it being torn apart in a character, in a story.
Yeah, and I think dramatically, when you see that happen to an individual person, I think that is more dramatically satisfying than if you like say, we're going to tell a story at like 1,000 miles height about a cast of thousands, right? And we're just going to say like, what happens to Australia when the world ends, right?
Who cares? It's Australia.
Right. Like, whatever, right? Like I would rather like know about Jim the Australian and how he, or Max, let's say, right, and how he copes with the problem, whatever the problem is, because I don't know, that seems to be more meaningful and more instructive to the reader, right? Like, because what you want, like, if a reader is going to come away from a story with anything, right, it is they're gonna apply it to their lives, right? And like you can't apply necessarily, right, something that's sort of diffuse and structural, right? It needs to be about you, and that's one of the advantages the dramatist, I think, has over the philosopher, right? Is the philosopher never really talks about an actual person, right? It's always abstracted and to some degree, almost always.
I assume you try to be both.
Yeah, well, you need to talk about the ideas, right, in writing a story, so that you can then put the ideas on the stage, right? And so sometimes spelling things out academically a little bit in the text helps sort of push the reader in the direction of the theme, right? And that balance is part of the dance, right? Like maybe you can be too obvious, and maybe being obvious can be like by design too, right? There are reasons to just say, "Hey, this is about this," right? But sometimes you also want people to not really understand what's happening in the moment. You want them to feel it later, or whatever the effect you're trying to achieve is. And there are ways to do all of these things depending on what it is you're trying to do. But yeah, you want to do both for sure.
Well, you had a line that you wanted to share.
Oh, I did. Yes. Yeah. I didn't want to throw us off topic as we were going on that conversation, but the line you had in here, and this is not it's in book 3, but it's an aside of sorts, so it doesn't spoil anything for anybody worried. But if you want to skip ahead 20 seconds. So you have here, the inner door had no latch, no knob or handle. It was only a convex arc of aluminum and white plastic, the kind of simplistic, primitive design the ancients had called postmodern, as if they had occupied the end of history and not its humble beginnings. And that line stuck out to me just in the conversation you're talking about here of like, talking. You are very much interested in the past and past historical figures and looking at wisdom and wrongs in the past, and just it's more complicated than, for example, your critique of Dune in Sun Eater is that, hey, messianic figures, there's also people who have to make horrible decisions, but there's also your Churchills also exist, just like your mustache guys, as you say, mustache guy on your and
Sure.
thank you for
Gotta protect you from the YouTube algorithm.
Exactly. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
But I just found it very interesting that obviously a lot of your background comes into when you're forming these themes and your messages in your stories. And when you were talking about Nolan and his themes are sometimes too on the nose or sometimes too like, what are you going for here, Nolan? And when you're going for your particular themes, what is the right balance? How do you try to strike the balance of giving your reader enough, but not basically, now what's the word I'm looking for? Not preaching to the person, but also giving them enough ambiguity to think about it on their own, because you do that really well.
Yeah, I don't know if I have a hard and fast sort of mechanical answer to that question, but there's something a priest friend of mine said to me once. He said that if the sermon is more than 15 minutes, it's pride. Now my books are a lot longer than like.
Put that in the next book.
Yeah. I think about that a lot, mostly because like sometimes there's a sermon that's longer than 15 minutes at church on Sunday, and I'm like, I don't think he knows my friend. So I sort of sit down, and if I realize I'm like trying to over explain whatever the idea is to make sure that my reader is going to get it, I just stop. Because if you're like really hammering the point home and you've gone on and on and on, and especially if I've taken time to try and say it again and again and again and make sure that it's right, you kind of just have to give up. And I think there's an element of trust there. I think where one of the places it's very easy to go wrong as a writer is not trusting your readers. And the thing about books is that actually it's not that the page is the medium, right? I'm giving you a script so that you can execute the experience in your own head. And it might be that you don't care about some of that stuff, or it might be that you're not going to notice some of it, or it might be that you might experience it differently than I would if I were reading it. And you have to kind of be okay with that as a writer, and trust that the reader is going to get enough out of the experience that it will be worth their continuing, right? That they'll like it. I sort of, I said I don't think about my audience very much earlier, right? And that's because I just use myself as sort of a proxy for whoever's reading the book, right? And I have to hope as a human being among human beings that like I am a good enough model for my reader.
Yep.
That it's going to be okay. And like there are times where I'm not, because like I'm me actually, right? And whoever's reading it might just like not be close enough to me, right, in some way, and that's okay, right? You lose some people, but yeah. So I think that backing away, especially when you as the writer are fighting whatever the passage is, just stop. It's probably actually fine, right? Especially if it's an explanatory thing, because it's also useful if people don't always get it, right? Because then they'll go ask, and then hey, someone had a conversation with someone about the book, right? And that actually has utility in and of itself. So
definitely. Yeah, I know Rich, you'd probably be interested in this a lot too, because Scott did a great job here asking some good questions, but he was interested. I was interested in seeing this because on another podcast, my goodness, I don't have the name on top of my head, but I was watching other interviews you've done, and you were talking about how in Empire of Silence in book 1, at the time you were an atheist. At the time you were, and then I love how you worded it there, saying that you figured out that you can't prove a negative, so then you became smarter. You were an agnostic, and then and then from there you I don't want to speak for you. You can obviously speak on this, but from there you then became you reverted back to Roman Catholicism, and just how that has affected your themes and the way you present things. The chantry, obviously, how has that affected the book overall, or the series overall?
Yeah. So with regard to the chantry specifically, right? I had written basically a mustache twirling sort of garden variety parody of Catholicism initially, which is like those are a dime a dozen in science fiction. They all suck. I except for the Ori and Stargate, they're cool. They can stay. Actually,
you are literally Richard. This is
We're on the same wavelength here. I can always appreciate a fellow Stargate fan.
Yeah.
Stargate's great, man.
It's so good.
It's so good. I will say the Ori are not the high
line.
point, obviously, right? But they get some points for me because they actually bothered to like write scripture for them, you know, and almost never does that happen, actually. So it was nice. But yeah, so like those are just in science fiction all the time. Like we live in an Anglophonic culture, right? And the English and the Spanish, and through the Spanish, the Catholic Church have been enemies for 500 years, right? So these stereotypes are the pervasive inheritance of our culture. So much so that like sometimes my Italian father will say things like, "That's like a very Englishman thing to say, sir." You know, what are you doing? And it's funny. I have a reader who lives in South Africa, and he accuses me of being too much the Anglophile. He's like, "You're an Italian Catholic. What's wrong with you? All your book references are English." And I'm like, "Well, English is probably the best language. It's great." And you know who agrees with me? Borges. So that's okay.
Sorry, I missed that reference. Borges?
Jorge Luis Borges, the Argentine writer.
Okay.
There's an interview where he talks about how English poetry is better than Spanish poetry. I can't remember his reasons.
But he said it, so you agree, yeah.
He did say it, yeah. It's in there somewhere. I think it's partly down to, like, English just has more words than any other language. Chinese is, I think, number 2. And so you're able to say things with a lot more distinction and variety in English. It's one of English's advantages.
We could just take other words. Like when we want to use fiasco, we'll use fiasco. When we want to use like au revoir, we'll use au revoir. You know,
but we also have like 2 of everything because of the strong, you know, Frankish influence, right, from the Normans, right. So the, you know, famous example, right, is like all the animal words are Germanic and all the food words are French, right? Because the upper class was handling the meat and not the animals, right? You know, and so these things are interesting, right? It's certainly not the only language for which this is true, but like, you know, that stuff's cool. But I've lost the plot completely.
Actually, could you just repeat what you said? Because I've never known that before about the food and that. Could you explain that just so I can take away
English,
that's just a cool fact? Yeah.
All the animal words are Germanic in origin, right? Pig, cow, right? But the food words related to those animals, right? Pork, beef, these are French, right? Because the English were ruled by the French for hundreds of years, right? And so they're, you know, they don't like to be reminded of this. Sorry, you know. But the Plantagenets were all Normans. It's okay. The Normans ruled a lot of people for a long time. Ask the Sicilians. You know, in any case, So all of the sort of upper class words, right? The meat words are Frankish in origin. These are like cool things to think about in world building too, right? Like you can do stuff like this, and like the fact that you thought about it as a writer, you know, people appreciate, right? So
you had great advice. I saw in a quick short you posted about having different cultures name the same thing differently. It's just a cool trick to go, okay, what do you, not in your world, but just what do the English call this? What do the Chinese call this? And then everybody has a different word for the thing, therefore making it feel more real.
Yeah. That's a super easy sort of thing you can do to add a lot of depth pretty quickly is use exonyms. We stopped mostly using them out of politeness in the modern world, right? You know, Turkey asked that we start spelling their country the way that they do, right? The Germans have not asked us to start saying Deutschland, I've observed, but you know, but people do.
They don't ask many things of us.
That is true. That is true. But like, for example, right? Like we say Spain, we don't say España, right? You know, and this was a lot more common, you know, in the last few hundred years. We've sort of started to sort of standardize, but having, especially in a fantasy setting, having people call things different names is something I've always appreciated, and it's a relatively easy thing to do. But it adds a certain degree of verisimilitude that I think is appreciated. And it's also something I don't see a lot of people do very commonly, or if they do it in a couple of edge cases and not maybe as much as they could. I just think it's a cool thing. So
yeah, it seems like it's the short way to add distance between cultures. of if everyone calls
Yeah.
things the same, like, of course. But if tiny, like, you just have 2 lines in something, you could automatically go, oh, these cultures don't interact as much as others. They're not in the same location. So, yeah.
Yeah, it
Great piece
might
of
surprise
advice.
you to learn that Xerxes did not call himself Xerxes, right? He called himself something that I will struggle to say, but it's I'll just do Darius instead. Darius did not call himself Darius; he was Darius, right? Which is pretty close, but Darius is a lot easier to say if you're a Greek. So,
Etymology is so cool. I mean, I'm at the basic level. I just think it's cool that the days of the week have their Norse origins, and even that's kind of cool to see because it's like those. What is it about that that's exciting? Why does that excite me? Or I guess you're the one who majored or minored in the classics. Where does that excitement even come from in the first place?
well, for me, right, it's just that everything actually is deeply meaningful.
Yeah.
And we live in a time when almost nothing is. And it's not that things are meaningless. It's that we decided they were meaningless, and we're just wrong about that, right? And so it's like very easy to see in words, right, that things mean things. And like we call it a fallacy, right? You like try to explain that's not what a word means, right? People say that's the etymological fallacy. I'm like, actually, you're just repeating that. Someone told you that on the internet, right? Turns out everything actually means something, and that you can't just call something a fallacy because you don't like that things mean things. It's one of those things I'll get yelled at for in the comment section. I see you down there.
Don't worry,
right?
they'll yell at us for not,
They yell at us for anything. Yeah, no, it's an enjoyable time. In all honesty,
they're usually kind to the guests. To us, no.
Yeah, but
why did you tell Christopher he was wrong? But no, like you get to learn, right? Like one of my favorite etymologies is for the word person, right? It comes from through the Latin persona, right? From the Etruscan word fersun, meaning mask, right? It's from theater, right?
Oh.
Because a character in a stage play of the period, right? They all wore masks. Right, and the characters were associated with the masks. You think like medieval theaters like this too, right? You have stock characters like Harlequin and Columbina and all these characters, and they would look a certain way so that people would know, right, like what the story is, even if it's just like a riff, like you wrote an original play, but you use these stock characters. It's like if you see Batman in a webcomic, you kind of know what to expect from Batman, right? Like especially if it's not an official thing, like someone's going to do the joke, right? There's going to be the same couple Batman jokes, right? Medieval theater is like that, but Greek theater, especially Greek comedy, was like that. But so this idea between personhood and masks, right, and appearances, and that tells you something about the attitude of these cultures, and the attitude really maybe of humankind itself about your personhood, right, and your presentation of that personhood, and I talked about acting like a waiter earlier, right? Like it's time to wear the waiter face, right? It's time to wear their writer face. It's time to wear, whatever face, right? And then the question is like, which one's real, right? And the answer is all of them in pieces at times. And like I think about that a lot. But then I also think about like how cool it is that like Etruscan is a dead language that's not related to anything, right? Like it's just one of those, and you just like everything, you keep pulling any of these threads, right? And there's just meaning all the way down, right? And I just that's one of the world is beautiful, right? It's one of those beautiful things about it.
Sorry, jump in too because I feel like I'm asking too many questions. So yeah, please.
On that point, has there been any kind of historical reference that you've added into your series that no one has actually commented on to
great
you?
Question.
Probably yes, but I don't know off the top of my head. I don't have a good example, but there must surely be one. Sorry.
Shoot, I would love. I know we wanted to do spoiler free, but I wanted to mention
a big spoiler.
It's kind of it's a big spoiler. Yeah. It really is.
We could say it afterward.
We'll talk about it afterward. I just appreciated the reference, and it was a fun. I had a unique experience because I was going audiobook first and then went to the hardcover.
I think I know the one that you mean.
And I was like,
does it start with an M and end with 2 I's?
Related, but no.
Okay. Because it's very common for people to not notice that, actually.
It was the one that starts with D. Like, it's just, that's how it's spelled. and I'm always listening to the audiobook, so I just assumed it's spelled how it sounds, and it's actually spelled differently, which has a completely different meaning. It was a fun experience for me.
Gotcha. Yeah. Okay. I think I know the one you mean.
Yeah.
It occurs to me, sort of riffing on that particular word, that I never finished the religion question. Right. Which
I was going to loop you back in. Though I was getting there. Yeah.
yeah. But yeah. So I had this problem where I like suddenly, because I my attitude towards Catholicism changed pretty dramatically between the first draft and having to edit it, for reasons too long to really get into, and I suddenly found that I had sold this book that I no longer believed in, so I needed to figure out what to do. And this was an opportunity, because like all problems are that, right, especially creatively, and to really build a distance between Hadrian the narrator and Hadrian the boy in the book. So I had to editorialize about the world a lot more than in the original draft. In the original draft, things are just the way they are. And there's a distance between the older Hadrian commenting on his feelings about things, and about his behavior as well, that wasn't in the original book. And that was really just an opportunity to improve everything. And so there's a weird analogy between Kid Hadrian and narrator Hadrian, and the slightly younger me that wrote the book and the slightly older me that edited it. There was, because talking about, personas, right? Like I changed pretty radically in the course of like a year. It wasn't like full conversion or anything, but it was still a big step away from like the Secular Student Alliance kid that I was. And so I had an opportunity to like solve this problem and sort of say something that wasn't another, dime store Catholic Church parody in a science fiction novel. Because we don't really need any of those. It turns out the stock is full. And where I've ended up, I think, is something that actually may not have been done completely before on the scale that I've done it. And I won't say more because book 7's not out yet. So this has like been a very central question for me. It's like, how do I deal with this silly bit of world building that I saddled myself with? And I'm very happy with the answer. So we'll see.
Awesome.
Yeah, I definitely felt that moment and that shift that you're talking about, like past and younger Hadrian. There's a particular scene or a particular sequence in book 2 where you feel the difference of a complete shift on the chantry, of like you now view it in there's a scene or two, yeah. There's a significantly different light, and I did notice that before I even knew anything about your faith conversion. But yeah, I thought it was just far more interesting.
I guess the part of that to finish up on that portion, when you're saying there's so much meaning in just words and history and looking at the crux of meaning, I guess that is very tied to religion in some way, it seems. I guess, how did you grapple that when you were atheist? Did you was there a meaning crisis?
Yeah, and I don't think I had an answer for it at the time. Okay. I just think I didn't think about it. I think I can't remember who said this, right? But that in a lot of ways, the Enlightenment was sort of a retreat from the religious questions that like caused the 30 Years' War, right? It's like, okay, we've had enough killing. Maybe we'll just adopt the premise that we just don't talk about this stuff and that this stuff doesn't really matter. Right. And that sort of trickled down over the centuries from the intellectual class to everybody. Right. And so you end up with like my parents' generation being like, you don't talk about religion, you don't talk about politics. Right. Nobody does ever. Right. And I'm like, maybe that's a good solution when you live in a society that has like every single possible right attitude on a subject in it. Right. Because you need to get along with your neighbors, and maybe being polite and not talking about things is the way you do that. You confine yourself to sports and Star Wars. But then it turns out that talking about sports and Star Wars becomes about as bad, and you have football riots, which actually we've always had football riots. The Roman Empire almost fell because of a chariot riot.
What?
In the 500s. The Nika revolts.
Oh, wow.
The Greens and the Blues were burning down the city right when was the Alans? I think it was the Alans attacked the city. It might have been a different tribe. No, or it might have been the Persians. I can't remember.
Wow.
It was during the reign of Justinian. Actually, have you ever read Sailing to Tarantium by Guy Gavriel Kay?
No, it's on the list.
No.
We love Guy Gavriel Kay. Have not read that yet.
Is such a genius. But those are my favorite K books, and he actually riffs on this episode in I think the first book of the two. But yeah, so we've always had football riots, but it turns out actually those things can be as caustic. And the thing we never had was Star Wars riots, and that's been like this explosive, vein of popular culture fighting, horror for the last decade, right? Has been like, are you an Orthodox Star Wars fan or are you a Protestant Star Wars fan, right? Like those never the twain shall meet, right?
And now with the new Star Wars, the Orthodox are looking at the Protestants going, hey, maybe you're not so bad.
You're not whatever this is, right? Yeah. You like the book
Protestants
of Boba Fett?
With
You
the Protestants
the
and
book of Boba
Orthodox
Fett into your
unite.
canon? Because of course the word canon comes from scriptural arguments, right? I
finally knew something of the factoids. Like, yeah, I knew that.
I knew that one.
Yeah. I always think that's funny, right? Because people are like, oh, that story isn't canon. Like, well, that the galaxy far, far away is not real, right? Like, I understand what people mean. Like, stories need to matter and make sense, but like to fight about this, right, with the fervor of Saint Nicholas punching Arius in the face, maybe it's just pod racing. Maybe it's just pod racing. Yeah. But no, like it sort of changed. It changed a lot for me, right? It changed. Broadly, Sun Eater was always about what it's about, right? And like the world building has actually not changed at all. People think that what things are and mean has swerved significantly because my life changed. But the story really hasn't changed. And I think that's largely because the writers who have so deeply conditioned me, the fiction writers, are Tolkien and Gene Wolfe and Herbert. And while Herbert was some sort of Buddhist, right, he was born a Catholic, and it's hard to quit, as I've found. But Tolkien and Wolfe especially are deeply Catholic, and I think that especially Tolkien, the phrase that gets used, by Catholics talking about Tolkien is "baptized my imagination." And so I think that I never, even while I was trying to run away from, being a Catholic for most of my life, I never ran away from Tolkien. And so, God works in mysterious ways, as they say. I think that sort of kept hooks in me. Mm-hmm. And so my thinking was always Catholic to the extent that it was in line with Tolkien to some extent. And so it was easy for me to come back, but also like very difficult, right? Like this is like, I'm not saying any of this is easy, right? Or isn't confusing, but because like I still like scratch my head at all sorts of things. So I'm like, what does this mean? Like, I'm not sure. Is that really not, is that really a problem? I don't know. Right. But, it's a journey, right? Like everything is. And these ideas are not trivial, right? Like people have wrestled with the supernatural for the entire time that we've been human. And so to sort of just shrug and say, I give up and go play video games is actually stupid. Like it's way dumber than being wrong about the questions. It's way dumber to not play the game. So, we'll see.
It's a weird courage, I guess, to just allow yourself to be wrong. I mean, there's also grace in not getting super animated on thinking someone else is wrong. It's a incredible gift to be able to find people to be able to talk about important subjects and not hate each other afterwards. The amount of people in my life I actually have to just not talk about politics or religion because I know it'll just cause chaos. And it's like, okay, well, I just can't talk to you about it. But it's wonderful when I can find people that I can talk about it. It's a genuine disagreement. But yeah.
Coming from like
one of my best friends is a Mormon, DJ Butler, fantasy writer. He also edited book 6. He's editing book 7. I have known Dave for 7 years, 8 years now. Dave's smartest guy I know. And we'll get into these arguments or discussions right now. And I'll have to preface with, well, obviously, Dave, we both think the other one is wrong, right? And he's like, sure. And then we'll go, but, and then into the whatever it is, right? And that is hard, right? It's like, how do you, how do you wade into really any subject matter when you know there's going to be the sort of deep, pointed disagreement? This is like not confined to religion either, right? Like, how do you decide that you want to interrogate that string theory is not true when the dean of your department is a string theorist, right? Ooh, turns out actually you can't. You have to go to another school, right? Good luck advancing physics, but yeah, it's hard, right? Like, people have those convictions. The problem with convictions is they can be wrong. At least that's one of the things that literature can do, right? Is characters can die so that we don't have to. And maybe in that lies some kind of solution. And it's for that reason that I think, maybe more than any other reason, that literature needs to not be subject to sort of politicizing nonsense. Like, the art just needs to be whatever the artist needs it to be, and people need to leave off. No.
It's something I know we love about stories is when reading about Hadrian, when reading any character in a book, it's much easier to then get into a conversation about themes or investment in the story about that, rather than, oh, here's a article and facts in my opinion on a current political thing, because then that will just divulge into so many assumptions. And also you go, okay, X, Y, Z, you're arguing about something that's more like could affect the person because they're more.
Well, especially between conversations of strangers, there's a little bit of a safety shield of, we're talking about this character and like, I'm not talking about you. A real problem with someone's sacred cow or someone's convictions.
Yeah.
People are afraid of testing that conviction, so they feel like that's a personal attack. But if you're talking about a story in which those exact same
walls
themes,
go down. Yeah.
The walls do come down, because you're talking about the character, not talking about you, not talking about what you believe.
Mm-hmm.
But we get to have this fun battleground with the character. At least that's how I enjoy it, because it's fun to see two different people, even the author, like, have completely different perspectives on the story that they've written. One of the better examples, I think, is Terry Pratchett's
Small Gods.
Small Gods. Yep. Terry Pratchett being an atheist.
Mm-hmm.
And yet I at least took out of it of quite a bit of positive theological messaging in that book that I don't know if, Terry actually intended. But I think he's such a beautiful and creative artist that the art stands and goes beyond him as a person.
I think that's a good point, to have Terry Pratchett as an atheist writing books that have themes of faith centered around it, and you could see it from an agnostic atheist point of view, also a Christian. Same with your books, of why it doesn't come across as preachy, but comes across as you hit that right balance, just like Terry Pratchett does, a religious writer, Tolkien does as a religious writer, versus Terry Pratchett, an atheist. But yet those themes are given in a way that it pushes the story over the messaging and preaching of it. We've talked about this in many episodes of just what we're talking about there, and it's kind of hard to get into. What do we mean by story over what we're discussing here?
Yeah.
Did you have any insight that you wanted to add on to that? Because we've talked endlessly about this.
Yeah, it's hard, right? Because, like, I know that Tolkien is on the good side of the line, and I know that C.S. Lewis is almost always on the wrong side of it, right? Weirdly, I like Lewis when, like, I read something like The Great Divorce, where I know going in that, like, the point is this is over the line, right? I don't know if you've ever read it, but
we have
like,
not, no.
It's really short. It's like a short story. But it's like very, like, blatantly about all of this, right? It's about people who, like, take a bus from hell up to heaven, and then they're like, are they going to stay or not, right? And they can decide to stay, and, like, why are they going to go back, right? Like, why would they rather be in hell? But, like, it's obviously, like, very, like, it's very
notes,
explicitly that, right? And it's supposed to be, and I think he's stronger there, I think, than in something like Narnia, right, or the Space Trilogy, which I can't actually speak on the Space Trilogy, so I shouldn't. I have not read it, but, like, it is it gets lumped in with Narnia, right? Like we get it, the lion is Jesus, right? He's not an allegory; it's literally Jesus, right? And like that's cool. Like that story is interesting, right? But if you're not open to it, you're not open to it. Whereas Tolkien is a lot subtler. He's a lot more nuanced in how he communicates these things. Right now, they're there. Tolkien was like worried he was way over the line too. Right? He says in his letters that he thinks the book is too Catholic for anybody to read it. And it turns out that actually, like a lot of people think he was secretly a pagan. Those people are crazy, but but they think that. And I don't know. I think that intention on the part of the author
Yeah.
is really where this matters. And it's very popular to say, well, the death of the author, blah, blah, blah. Actually, I'm alive. I try really hard not to editorialize about like why I'm doing whatever, right? Or what things precisely mean. I actually don't like to talk about, especially this, in relationship to what the books mean and stuff, because if I do that, then the people will. If I give you an answer, you're going to stop listening, right? There's going back to David Lynch, right? There's the interview. I think he's on Letterman, and he says, "Well, believe it or not, Eraserhead is my most spiritual film." And Letterman says, "Elaborate on that." And he says, "No." Right, and like that's maybe the right answer, but if you are as a writer, if you're trying to be an evangelist, you're trying to be a preacher, then you're not writing. You're not being a fiction writer, at least, I think, because your goal, and this goes beyond religion, this applies to politics, it applies to interpersonal relationships, it applies to any dimension of human, effort, existence that you want to talk about. If you're going in to like say something, then you are worse off than if you go in trying to show the characters experiencing something. Because what you might find in telling the story honestly is that you don't believe what you thought you believed as the writer. And so if you go in with a thesis statement that you're trying to prove, like you're writing a high school paper, then you will not have that experience because you can't, because you've closed it off to yourself from the beginning. You've done yourself as the person writing the story a disservice, because what you could actually learn is that a thing you thought you believed, you don't. You don't have the guts to pull the trigger, right? You in the story, you realize the character doesn't have the guts to pull the trigger. And if you do something where you force something to happen to communicate a message, your readers will always tell, can always tell. And I think that's where the difference lies. And the problem is, of course, we don't do literary criticism anymore in a way that allows for the intention of the author. And so it's hard to know if the story really works, because I think the only real way you can evaluate the quality of a work of literature is to understand the distance between what the author set out to achieve and whether or not he or she achieved it. And, like T.S. Eliot says Hamlet sucks because whatever Shakespeare is trying to do isn't clear, basically, right? And but I also like he doesn't get there, right? Like I can't remember exactly Eliot's thing, but he called Hamlet a dramatic failure for this reason, right? Is that like it didn't get where at least he thought Shakespeare was trying to go. And sometimes that's a matter of forensics. It's like, what's the story really about? Like, what's the author trying to do? But sometimes authors will just tell you, right? The lion is Jesus, right? And sort of from there you can get the rest. But yeah, I think that's the answer is the author trying to convert me? I certainly am not. I don't think that evangelism works the way that it does in the first century, where you just go and tell people about a thing, like everybody actually has heard about the thing, right? That's not how you change people's hearts. I certainly can't do that with a science fiction novel. I'm certainly not trying. I want people to. I don't want to like belabor the religion point here and think people run the risk of people thinking they're getting a theological lecture from me. They are, but it's not only that, right? Like they're getting, not really, right? But like you're getting a story about a guy who lives in a world where things happen, right? And some of the assumptions of that world are theological. Some of the assumptions are political. Some of those assumptions are about how physics works, right? Is FTL possible? Well, it turns out yes, right? Like you have to make assumptions as a storyteller, and those are convictions, right, for the purposes of writing the story, and be a little awkward when you end up personally with convictions that the story no longer holds, right? But these are, then you have to figure out what to do with that. So, I want to be careful. I don't want people to think they're getting, Augustine's Confessions here. There's still aliens and sword fights and things blow up and political intrigue and romance, dare I say, right? So like I don't want to get lost in this, but like that stuff's important, and I think that science fiction has done religion a disservice by pretending it will just go away. Human beings are, I think, intrinsically spiritual, whether or not we want to be, and so that's a dimension of human life that's not going anywhere, even if the nature of the worship or the object of it changes. So like my science fiction has a strong religious element to it. It's not a Christian element explicitly. There are a couple characters who are, but they do not dominate the narrative in any way. It's not like that. Yeah.
Sorry, I was so well said. I was just going, yeah. That's a lot of nodding on my part. That was
I'm like
really well said.
3 to Ramble today.
Exactly. Yes. So was interested in going into that route just because I know you dived into it one episode, and I just thought that was so interesting that your entire worldview changed so quickly in a year, and to get that was just incredible. And I think it actually helped in a big way with the point of views of older, younger Hadrian, not to shit on Patrick Ruffus, but to shit on Patrick Ruffus. We don't love The Name of the Wind. I'm sorry if you like it, but
no, that's fine.
But yeah, part of the framed narrative of having the older and the younger character, just seeing a big difference, or at least that the current, the old, the aged, and then again in The Name of the Wind, he's not that much older in the actual book. So to be fair, Hadrian's, no spoilers, this is intro book, is much older than younger Hadrian in Empire of Silence. But getting even that, I think, was a somewhat a happen chance, really lucky thing to happen as well, because it allowed, I think, you to separate enough, at least it comes across that way, to where and I'm very light stuff, sorry people if you want to skip the light Name of the Wind stuff, but when older and younger Hadrian, they seem to almost disagree with something. They're not 100% uniform, and then other times when reading other frame narratives, it's like, is this the same? This feels like the same person. And it's almost as if there was two different authors writing that for your case. Yeah.
Well, that's why bother having a frame narrative if the future character kind of already believes basically the same stuff, and it's like, why have both? Just go with one, unless you make the two characters actually disagree and have some degree of difference. And it asks the question of, oh wow, look at how different they are. How did they get from here to here? That's the fun part of a frame narrative, at least for me.
Yeah.
So
every choice you make dramatically needs to do preferably more than one thing, right? But you should like never just do things. You should always have some reason for what you're doing. But yeah, no, I it was a big year for me. Not the biggest by any means, but I also am pretty ashamed of like my teenage self, right? Like I just was like really mean to people for no reason. And so like it helps to just know that like you're not the same person. You don't have to be the same person, and that basic distance between yourself and yourself is something that like really informed that decision for me, just because of being who I am, I guess. So.
And your themes definitely dive into that question as well, which is lovely. There's also Samwise has a YouTube channel. Samwise, he's a good pal of ours. Yeah, he sent us a while ago. You have an old YouTube channel from like 12 years ago in college.
Sure.
And I just had to mention it because you mentioned how embarrassed you were of your teenage self. I think you were probably 20s and this. Maybe you were.
That would have been probably sophomore year, so just about that.
19 or 20. So if anybody wants to see a little bit of teenage Ruocchio, I don't even have the link to it.
It's fine. That channel is tied to my college email address, and so it is impossible for me to get rid of it. There is no mechanism short of an act of Congress that will take the videos down. Fortunately, I think all of them were for class in some way, so they're not like. They're not too bad. They are embarrassing, but that Goblin wrote book 1. So
You can look back to that younger Hadrian / Christopher in this case, where Rich and I do this. I mean, so many videos are out there online. I will never go back and rewatch stuff that we did 2 years ago. I can't.
I did it once. No. Wouldn't recommend it.
I imagine.
Terrible.
I imagine you're not going out there rewatching those videos.
Oh no,
for your own mental health.
No. I remember the Run Rhetoric video I did actually went over very well with class though. So, so it's not too bad. But it's funny you mentioned this. Jamie Jones, the artist. He does book covers. He did the Curious King edition of Hyperion. He does a lot of Magic the Gathering stuff.
Cool.
He did the deluxe edition, the new cover for Will of the Many.
Okay. Yeah.
So I
went to the same high school. I've never met him before. He does not know me. But I had a friend of mine was messaging him and mentioned me because I told this to my friend. And Jamie Jones found where I sent him an email in 2011. So when I was in high school, he found it in his email. I guess his trash goes all the way back. Mine does not. And I was like, oh no, what did I say? Please do not judge me by the actions of my high school senior self. Yes. But we had the same art teacher, which is funny. It worked much better for him than me. But
what was the email?
I don't know. I haven't seen it yet. I'm terrified.
Yeah.
I'm sure it was basically I was in art class. I was painting a magic card for a landscape because I thought that would be more interesting than just doing something else. So I was trying to redo. I don't think it was one of his paintings. I think it was someone else's. But it was probably about that. So in some way.
I'm so sorry to bring this. This is a big question. I don't want to take any more of your time. We're already at the hour and a half.
Oh, I'm totally fine. Totally fine.
Very curious on, and you don't even have to answer this because we've talked about this multiple times on the podcast about separating the art versus the artist. And the question about that, everyone knows what we're posing. Like, hey, supporting with money for an artist. There's a lot of different things to talk about when it comes to, and depending on, is this somebody that did a bad thing or is this somebody that you disagree with? Because why I asked that question is the case you're talking about here is, hey, your younger self, you're embarrassed about your younger self. This is like a more funny side of looking at it versus you're not a bad person.
It's just silly. There's nothing bad there.
It's silly. Whereas there's somebody that does a bad thing, then there's a big moral question about what do you do? But then in the case of, like, let's say, whatever that toad line is, but someone like you who you didn't like teenage stuff, didn't like that I did that, did nothing serious, but someone could judge you for things you were doing and saying like 7 years ago about a Dune film, and like that's their impression of Christopher forever, and they don't know, obviously, with that weird transition in your life, changed so much, and you're going to continue to change throughout your life, of course, as we all are. So question for you being, when you're looking at the less serious, like we're not talking about the Neil Gaiman, for example.
We're dancing around Neil Gaiman.
Neil Gaiman.
I can tell. Yeah.
Dance around Neil Gaiman because I don't want to pressure you to answer anything on that. So just more so for yourself and going, hey, how do you reestablish a character? Not in Neil Gaiman's, in your case of like, I didn't like my actions at this time. How do you reestablish or restart a reputation, especially as an author?
How do you restart the reputation?
I mean, just for somebody that...
especially because your journey in publishing went, like you were dropped by your publisher and then picked up again, like your reputation, at least according to the publisher, must have changed to some degree.
Yeah, so you're asking... I'm trying to make sure I understand the question. So is it like...
It's not clear.
If you are trying to... like you've been yourself on the internet, but now you're like a professional. How do you manage that?
Yeah, it's just more so on business end, because I'm just saying here's a more silly way of looking at it. Like 2 years ago for Rich and I, if you look at our early podcast, it's like, I think we were more dry. I think just we weren't as excited. And now somebody's impression of us going and looking at a video 2 years ago, that's what they think of Tutor Ramble. I just mean you're on so much, and you're going to change as a person. We all do. How would you say, or would your more advice be to writers, authors, et cetera, hey, podcasters, of letting someone give you a second chance, because their first impression of your first book could be Empire Silence. How do you get somebody to go read Howling Dark? How do you get someone to go, hey, give Christopher the person another chance and not the stuff you think you know about them?
Yeah. Well, obviously sometimes you can't, right? You need to like
Yeah.
let that go. You can't control other people. And you shouldn't want to. But setting that aside, right? A big problem with sort of modern culture is that there is no forgiveness, right? You do something wrong, right? It can be the silliest, dumbest thing, right? You don't like the right Star Wars movie at the wrong time, you're dead, right? Now that's actually cooled down. Like basically everybody's been forced to admit that, yeah, the new stuff ain't it, right? But like whatever, whatever it is. If it's obviously if it's like really bad, if it's a criminal thing, like then you like should be prosecuted probably, right? And like those mechanisms should kick in, and actually maybe the internet shouldn't decide what right or wrong there is. Like we have a justice system, right? But if it's like, you have like some embarrassing Facebook posts or something from 2009, right? You could get rid of them. That's an option, right? You could get rid of a lot of that stuff and make a new, like, especially if you like just get published, it might behoove you if you don't have a platform that you're relying on, right? Because publishers do try to pick up people with platforms now, right? But if you don't, you're just like me. Like I had nothing, right, when I started. Maybe just make new accounts, close the old ones down, right, and start over and be serious because there's a lot of stupid playground nonsense in and around science fiction and fantasy literature, right? There's like drama about awards. There's like who got invited to be the guest where. There's like, this person doesn't like that person and you hung out with this person, therefore blah, 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 blah. If you've been to high school, it's like that. But you don't leave in 4 years. You can either leave when you want to or never. And all of that stuff is a waste of time. All of it. None of it sells books. I used to work for Bain, and I would see writers come in, and they would think that what they were going to do is they were going to drum up controversy on the internet, and that would sell books. It does not work. Even for writers who have reputations for doing this, it probably kneecaps their growth and like hurts them. Because the people who show up to watch your YouTube videos or follow your whatever feed because you are lighting people up on the internet are not reading your books. They're there for the show. They're there for the fight. They're there to see people get their hair ripped out, and whatever. And it does not sell books. What sells books is talking about books. Even reviewing other books does not really sell books, right? You need to talk about your work, and you need to be excited about your work because if you're not, no one else will be. And all that other stuff gets in the way. Like there's been like a lot of drama about like new publishers opening up and stuff. Or is this publisher on the ropes, right? Like all of that stuff is a distraction, and like you should focus on what you're doing, and you should talk about what you're doing and why people should care, and you should do probably nothing else as a public person except promote your work and your feelings about your work and yourself, because like you as as the author writer, really I hate to say product, right? But like if people like you, they will give your books a try. Even if they didn't like the first book, they might give it another try if they like you, right? And if they like the books, they might give you another chance if you say something dumb one time about Dune 2, which is the bad one, by the way. But you like also like may I got to get it in there. What was Chani doing? I just don't know. Right. So like maybe. Also, I'm not sorry about that. So, people.
For those that don't know, Christopher and I, we
Never
bonded over
apologize.
our Dune 2 hate.
Hatred,
I just mean disappointment. I don't hate
Yeah,
the film.
it's not the second half of Dune, is what it is. I digress. It's very pretty. The cast is great. All the design elements are awesome. But what is going on? I just don't know. I'll watch Dune 84
well, thank you for you're answering the question better than we even posed it. Like you're answering the correct question that we were trying to get at.
I just want to make sure I was.
You are. Yeah, because we're floundering around it. Go ahead.
The real key here is if we just explain the question in a very clear manner to you, it wouldn't allow you to think about it. So we have to ask you a very unclear question.
Yeah, it's like a koan. Yeah,
exactly.
It's like we're presenting a book. We don't want to be too direct, like preach at you.
Yeah, we're not preaching. We're just trying to get the seeds.
Get it right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I got it. That's it.
That because that's part of the way I question, I guess, because when you're saying more so modern culture, like forgiveness, you hit you're spot on when you're talking about how forgiving our people toward something that is not as nefarious. Where more so what I mean, and sorry, I don't mean this to mean the theme of the podcast. I mean, like, let's say somebody says you're Roman Catholic, like, and then you have publishing issues with that, or that, and this, not saying this is happening for you or anybody, but something that from your intent is like, oh, this is nothing's wrong, but people perceive it's wrong. More so, how do you deal with that in or industry level or fans or something like that is not tied to your faith, but just give an example? Because
it's easy to answer the faith one, right? If people have a problem with that, I fix yourself, right?
Yeah,
like
right.
that's a you problem, right? And not to put too fine a point on it, but like Jesus literally did warn us that like people were not going to like that about like not going to like that you're Christian. So par for the course on that one, and that's fine, right? It's fine. Like if people want to hate me for that, that's cool. But like, I mean, if people want to dislike me for any reason, the internet is fake, right?
Correct.
It is not real life, and like now it can really hurt people, right? I'm not really diminishing that, but like in a certain sense, like we are not as organisms evolved to deal with the pressures of the internet. It is super weird that like the whole world gets to weigh in on your life and your choices, and it's actually probably wrong. You probably shouldn't do that, right?
Yep.
It's very easy for me to at least switch it off, right, and walk away. And like maybe like I used to, I used to get into Twitter arguments, right? Like who doesn't, right? But like just don't do it. It's just not good for you. It's not good for anybody to participate in it. I started doing this thing where I would look at comment sections, and if the thing I was going to say is already there, and it always is already there, I wouldn't say anything. Right, because you can never actually meaningfully contribute to an internet conversation. It's not worth it. And like all you can do is like add your voice to the pile of stones that are getting dropped on another person's head. And like, why would you do that to anybody, right? There's just no point. And
I will add a clarification, or just especially we're on YouTube.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
there, at least the value for us is people who they'll be commenting on this video. Maybe like there won't be a real there often is never really a conversation at all. But at the very least, there is the semblance of us, the creators, are seeing the message. Like being able to get across thoughts in a larger collective, there is some value of that. I almost see it very differently than a comment board on Facebook or Twitter, where like, there's no, and they're trying to have a conversation where YouTube comments are not conversations.
That's true, right? And certainly for us, right? Like, hey, leaving a comment is engagement. Thank you, right? Like, that's great, right? The problem is like if you start wading into these, whatever the drama is, right? Mm-hmm. Like, I think that me as a writer should like never do that, right? Like, you should never, especially in writing, like, don't go into a comment section and like jump on another writer's head, right? Like, I may not like your work, and I'll be like frank about it or whatever, right? I'll be polite. No intention of being rude, unless you're rude first. I'm not so good about that, working on myself. But there's a little bit of Hannibal Lecter in there, minus the cannibalism.
And that's actually, I think that's where the question is coming from. And like people will give feedback on this episode. Like, anyways, that's where the question's coming from. If you're very open with, I think this about Dune 2, I think this about this. And I'm just very curious from your point of view, because I'm not talking about those serious things of an author, like again, justice system and all that, but you're very open about, I like this, I don't like this, I like that. And I guess I've just heard in the publishing industry, if you're so gung-ho about liking and not liking some things, like sometimes that can be taboo, but I'm just curious why you're not as taboo about it. And I genuinely, like, I love that, because obviously we're not taboo about that.
Well, lying is more wrong than saying something people don't want to hear. You can say something people don't want to hear politely, or you can say it rudely, and like, I'm not perfect, but like, I would rather tell the truth, and I would rather people tell me that, like, there's an article in The Guardian that R.F. Kuang wrote a couple of years ago where she talks about how she wishes Goodreads would get rid of the number system, right, and just let people post their opinions. And I actually only care about the numbers, because there are really like only 10 reviews for Empire of Silence, right? They like, if you factor analyze what people are saying, like it's like there are a couple of reviews like, oh, this is the one that complains about it being too much like Dune. Okay, read that one before. And I read that one, and like, fair enough. I'm not saying they're wrong, but like I've read it before, right? Pull the other one, right? It's a question of like how many people like the thing, right? And if I turn in a book and like nobody likes it, it has a 2, right? Then I should like maybe take the reviews seriously, right? Like maybe I did something wrong, because if that many people are saying the same thing about what the problem is, that's me. That's not them, right? But if it's one person, right, then it's them. It's always them if it's one person, right? So like the Dune review I listened to, right? Like that one review that 100 people made, 200 people made, I listened to, right? Because it came up enough that it was like it was worth listening to, right? And but if it only occurs a couple of times, then it's not important. And if the numbers are still on average pretty good, then I know that I like can stay the course, right? I don't need to like go and rethink myself, because that's what would need to be rethought, right? Is like my whole approach to storytelling. If everybody hated it, right, then I would have soul searching to do. It's not a question of fixing the book. It's a question of fixing myself in some way, not to like become what other people want, right? But like maybe I just believe something that's not true, right? Like in that sense by which fiction is true, right? Like the ending of Game of Thrones isn't true. Like it like bothered way too many people for it to make sense, right? It doesn't make sense. All due respect to everybody involved, I think I think everybody was doing their best except the guy who left their coffee cup on the table.
And there's a water bottle too in another episode.
There's a water bottle too. Yeah, both of those people, they were not doing their best. But everybody else, like, because sometimes, it's that card line, right? You can you do everything right and still lose. And that's true creatively. That's true in everything, right? It might be that I finish book 7 and people don't like it because I'm not good enough, right? And that'll suck if that's what happens, right? But like the right attitude is to recognize that like I wasn't good enough. It's not to say, all those people are wrong or something. You need to have, I think, and this is something I struggle with. I'm not saying I'm doing it well either, right? But like you need to have that certain sort of element of humility, right? That's sort of the corollary of there being no forgiveness. Like you need to be willing to accept it, right? From yourself, from other people, whatever, right? And if you do something wrong creatively or metaphysically or absolutely, then you need to make it right to the extent that it can be made right. And like maybe that's like, deleting your cringe high school Facebook posts before you become a professional author. Or maybe that's going to prison, right? Or maybe that's writing a better book next time, right? Like nobody's finished, right? Like in the same way that like books are not ever really finished. Just keep improving. So
yeah. Loved hearing that, because sorry people, Howling Dark touches on some of this, I just will say, and I just loved your exploration of that theme quite a lot. And I like how that ties in with the separating art and earth a little bit, but also that theme in Howling Dark is, I think, one of my favorites of any book. I floored me. So just want to start at the end, just say, hey, Ruocchio, we agree on the order. It goes Howling Dark's the best, then Demon White, then Empire Silence of the first three.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, good. And Rich, you can be wrong with your 3, 2, 1.
Hey, 3, 2, 1's fine.
Yeah.
I just really like Howling Dark. But like, it's also like it's a taste thing, right? Like the tones of those, especially 2 and 3, are so different. There's room. There's room.
And Rich, did you want to end with something there? Yeah.
I did have another question from Kendall that kind of falls in the line. We were asking about like what was your favorite book to write out of at least the first 3, but could you give it a non-spoilery way, like just location of what was your favorite like moment in the series to write? Like, do you know
period
like
or
book
first 3
and
books?
location? Sorry, say.
Without spoiling?
Just like a book and location roughly. Do you know it? Like if someone's read it, they'll know.
Yeah, I mean, anywhere, any scene on Vergosos at any point in any of the books where it appears will be as vague as possible. Those are all,
okay.
Those are all sequences I'm really happy with. Likewise, any of the scenes that like the main Sealson is in, whichever books those may be, including the ones you haven't read yet. Everybody. Some stuff in book 7 I'm really happy with. Obviously, right? But those scenes in particular, those scenes in particular.
Just wait till you announced book 8 coming soon.
Plot twist, yes. Well, of course, there will be a book 8, but it will not be Sun Eater book 8. It will just be Christopher book 8. So
yes, we'll be following you on that journey because that's going to be exciting to read fantasy after this as well. But of course,
yeah, I'm very excited about that. So.
Yeah. Okay. Last thing, is that going to be a series or just it will be a series? Or are you going to do?
Yeah, assuming we do go ahead with the thing I pitched, it will be a trilogy. I will outline the whole thing in advance, so I will prevent mission creep. At least that's the theory. It will just end up being 3 books.
Okay.
And I will write them like I am Peter Jackson, and I will do them all at once.
Oh,
yeah.
Do we don't know if you're able to talk about it all? Let us know if you can't. But do you happen to have a time, like a rough estimate timeline, and when you think like book 1 of that series would come out?
I mean, after book 7, obviously, but let's say sooner rather than later. Like I have bills to pay. Mouths to feed now. And I got an extra one by the time the video comes out.
Yep.
Although it's easier to feed for the first little bit there. Number 1 is like, what is this? This is a food I haven't seen before on the floor. Great, thanks. Awesome, love that. I always thought that like diapers would be the bad part of having a small child. No. Dinner table is much worse.
Really?
So much worse. Despite being a waiter for 7 years, I hate other people's food. I just hate it. Just get it away from me. People would always do that thing where they would hand you the plate, but with the edge where they dumped it into their box, pointing to you. And I'm like, no, I'm going to touch your hand. We're going all the way around. Don't want tomato sauce. No, sir. But
it's specifically with food. It's not with other facets of life. It's just food.
Just like there's mashed potatoes on the floor. That's like, there shouldn't never be mashed potatoes on the floor. I expect there to be the contents of a diaper in the diaper, but like, there's a pea under the chair and it got smashed. Great. Awesome.
I really hope book 7 has a theme about this, like just explores.
Another book maybe. Book 7's too busy with the intergalactic wars, I think.
I guess we'll have to deal with that for now. Rich, anything?
No, that was about it. I wanted to just end off with that, but peas under chairs. That's a great spot.
It pretty much encapsulates what we talked about this whole episode. Peas under chairs.
Yep.
Christopher, thank you a ton. Anybody watching, all the links in the description below to book 7 will be out by this point. All of his other books, all other links that he mentioned below.
New book 7 will not be out.
No, not out. Pre-ordering will be
pre-ordering. Yes.
Yeah. Good clarification.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Book 7 pre-order.
We're not holding on to this video
until November.
No. But pre-order down below. All that good stuff. Christopher, did you want to slide off with it? Do you think?
No, I just want to thank you guys for having me. It's been great. And hopefully by the time this video is out, book 7 will actually be done for real. Very close. Like I said, it's already with the editor, so the wheels are turning. But, I've got a couple chapters to wrap up. So,
yeah. Thank you a bunch, Rich.
Yeah. Thank you so much. And we'll see you guys in the next episode.
Bye-bye.